How do you identify as Vietnamese, Vietnamese American, or American?
So I identify myself as Vietnamese American.
I identify myself as Vietnamese American.
Identify myself as American.
I identify as Canadian. First thing anybody asks me, like, where are you from? First thing that pops out is Canadian. Eventually, it gets to Vietnamese Canadian.
I identify as Vietnamese American.
How did you first adapt when coming to the US, and what did you have to do to essentially make ends meet? Well, when I came, I was young. I was about 4 years old, so just learning the language was probably the first way I learned to adapt. A lot from watching TV. We did have some sponsors that helped us assimilate and acclimate to the new culture here. They were Caucasian Americans, what limited English I knew, I learned from speaking with them. And regarding to how we made ends meet, my mother worked odd jobs until she got a better grasp of the language, and then she became a social worker for many years, and I guess that's how we made ends meet in the beginning.
When I came to America, I was only 2 years old, so I did not do anything to adjust. I grew up as an American.
Did you feel pressured to assimilate and acculturate to the dominant American culture?
No, I didn't feel pressure to assimilate and acculturate. Like I said, I was young when I came, and it just seemed natural to me. Being, very young, you're very adaptive. So no, I never recall feeling any pressure to assimilate. Went to school, kids spoke English. I assumed I had to communicate with them, so I learned to speak English as well.
I don't remember ever having to change. I grew up in San Jose, which was basically very welcoming at that time with Asian Americans, with Vietnamese. That's when the Vietnamese community was building. So there was no need to change. You just live within your culture.
How was it learning a new language entirely? I don't think it was very difficult for me. Again, I was 4 years old when I came. We went to a English as a second language center when I was young. Watched a lot of TV, learned English that way, and my mom spoke some English. Primarily, the language at home early on was Vietnamese, but I think it was relatively easy learning the English language.
English was basically my first language. Coming to America at the age of 2, my parents made sure that we spoke English first before Vietnamese.
What does education mean to you?
Well, I think education is extremely important. It was instilled upon me at an early age that in order to move upwards in society, you had to get a good education, and that meant going to at least university. Both my parents were college educated, so it was never a question not to go to college. If you really have to invest in yourself and put your education first.
Do you feel disconnected from your history, especially to Vietnam?
Most definitely disconnected. My connection to Vietnam is very tenuous through just my parents and the Vietnamese community that they're involved in. I definitely do not have any direct connection. Anything I learned about Vietnam really is through what I learned through school. My parents would talk about it. Their memories were kind of always filtered through, a romantic lens, and they didn't really talk about it much with me growing up, except for some stories of epic struggles and, hardships that they endured. But they didn't really talk about it because I think they were so busy just trying to survive and, adapt to a new country. Now, unfortunately, I feel like I'm an outsider looking in when I'm talking about Vietnamese history and any connection to that.
I do feel disconnected a little bit just because I was raised in America, And so I haven't ever visited Vietnam before. And what I know about Vietnam is based on like small stories that my parents would tell me, but they generally didn't really talk a lot about Vietnam and their life back then.
Are you fluent in Vietnamese? If not, why? Unfortunately, I am not fluent. I'm no longer fluent in Vietnamese. When I was younger and we all lived together with my aunts and uncles or cousins, and it was spoken daily at the house, yes, definitely. But then we eventually dispersed about when I was 3 or 4. So just like they say, if you don't use it, you lose it. I did go to Vietnamese school, which I hated on Saturdays, but that wasn't enough to really continue the growth and understanding of Vietnamese. And it's unfortunate because I would really love to be able to pass it on to my kids, but that's the way it is.
I'm not very fluent in Vietnamese. Usually if somebody is speaking to me in Vietnamese, I will understand it, but it's hard for me to formulate sentences and answer back, and I can't read in Vietnamese. I guess the only reason why I haven't been as fluent in Vietnamese as in English is because I didn't practice it a lot. I would practice it a little bit when I was younger and I was raised by my grandparents, but as I grew older and I had more school and more work to do, I practiced it less and less at home.
I think I can get by with my Vietnamese. I can read a menu pretty well. I can speak to most people in Vietnam. However, I have a hard time understanding certain accents. For a person that's lived here for 45 years, my Vietnamese is decent. Am I fluent? No, I would not say I'm fluent. And I cannot write Vietnamese, but I can read bits and pieces of it.
Yes, I am fluent in Vietnamese. I can read, I can write, and I can speak it. And I can actually speak in many different dialects.
What does success look like to you?
For me, success, I guess, would be, I see it as something that's personally fulfilling, finding a job that I'm passionate about, personally fulfilling, and having a good work-life balance where I enjoy what I do, but I also have time for my family and my own personal passionate pursuits.
Did you feel inclined or have to change aspect of your identity in order to fit in?
I did. I did have to change the way I see the world and the way I act to be able to feel fit in, especially when I first enter high school in the United States. I have to change myself to be able to speak out, to be able to give my opinion, make other people acknowledge that I am here, because in the Vietnamese culture, as a woman and younger teenager, we don't get to speak out a lot, especially when teacher and older adult tell you something or they give you opinion even though you don't like it, or you don't feel that is right, you still have to agree and accept it. But in America, it's really different. You are free to tell people how you feel. You're free to tell people what you think. I think your opinion and your idea was really valued in America, and it's really different from my culture.
When did you move here, and how has your perspective changed over time?
So I moved to San Francisco in 2011 from Saigon, Vietnam, and my perspective changed a lot when I got here. Because when I was here, I was 12 years old, so I spent most of my time studying and living in Vietnam. I did elementary school in Vietnam, and I finished 6th grade and 7th grade in Vietnam. So when I migrate here to San Francisco, I enter 8th grade. So when I entered high school, I chose a school that had no program for immigrants, for newcomer. So I had a lot of time to spend with native speaker and friends who actually born here in America and speak English pretty well. That's how I learned English.
Do you have a cultural object or name that is significant to you and your identity?
Buddhism, Not that I'm a practicing Buddhist, but it was always a big part of my life. My parents are practicing Buddhists, so I spent a lot of time at the temple. And while as growing up, I didn't quite grasp or understand the chanting, I feel like overall ideas of cause and effect and compassion and other central ideas that they instilled in me color the lens through which I view life.
I have a pair of earrings that when I got engaged in the Vietnamese culture was the significant as a gift as just as in America where it's the ring. It's actually the earrings given to me on the engagement day. The engagement day is more important than the wedding day.
I do not have a cultural object. I keep my original given name. It's still on all of my official paperwork. I go by Tony as just something simple for my friends and co-workers to call me by, but all my family know me as my original given name. And if you call me Tony, I'll turn my head. If you call me Hui, I might not know it right away unless it was a family member calling me. That's how I hang on to my identity.
I guess my name would be unique and significant to my identity. My name is Thuylin, and it means gentle soul. And I think growing up, when I was younger, I didn't like having my name just because it was so different from everybody else's. But now, looking back on it, I really appreciate my name, and I feel like it really makes me unique.
I really like this candy. Is like a sesame candy. It's just sesame and like sugar. And here's a picture of the candy. The Vietnamese name is called kẹo mè sừng. We usually have it on like festival, like New Moon, Full Moon's festival, or the Vietnamese New Year Tết. They just remind me of like my childhood memory where when I was in Vietnam, it was really fun, especially like when it's come to festival, and I missed it.